se nyt 2 minutes?
In 1-2 minutes.
Yes. Good morning. Welcome to KuvA Research Days. This is the second day, and we have a 2-part program. In the morning we have 4 presentations. 3 first of them will be streamed, and the 4th one will be only here on site. And in the afternoon there is a workshop, follow through walking. It takes place outdoors. And I think in the afternoon there has been pre-registration, so it's already organized. As first presenter we have Tuula Närhinen. As second presenter we have Tanhuanpää, and the third presentation is by Maiju Loukola, and the 4th one is by Kerstin Schroedinger. And I have asked the speakers shortly to introduce themselves, so I let Tuula Närhinen start her presentation. Welcome, Tuula.
Thanks, Mika. Good morning, everybody, on site and online. I am Tuula Närhinen. I'm visual artist and university researcher at the Academy of Fine Arts. My works build on simple techniques that leave traces. Some of the traces I deal with are naturally generated, such as this almost 2,000 years old handprint left on a potsherd. I found it on the Monte Testaccio in Rome. The place is one of the largest spoil heaps in the ancient world. The artificial hill is awash with fragments of broken amphorae and ancient Roman pottery. In addition to natural traces like the potter's hand imprinted in clay, my talk addresses cultural techniques that allow tracing down the features of a physical object by direct material to material contact, such as the rubbings on paper. I focus on processes of imaging and use my artist practice to study the visual medium and to probe its structuring properties. In January 24, I initiated an artistic research project that goes with the rather grand title, World Making with the Aesthetic Apparatus, tracing vision back to the embodied observer. The project is funded by the Research Council of Finland, and it is programmed to last until July 27. Today I will talk about artworks and concepts related to traces, imprints, and analog imaging process. My thinking adheres to the constructionist strand of image theories, according to which, and now I quote from the German visual historian Horst Bredekamp, quote, "Images do not merely represent, but veritably construct, do not merely illustrate, but actively bring forth that which they show." Seconding Bredekamp, I understand that this bringing forth could also mean world-making process, where images serve as cultural techniques which contribute to establishing fictional or socially constructed realities, such as, for example, this recent project of mine that studies fossil imprints and the uses of limestone, exhibited at the Gotland Museum in Sweden, in Visby in Sweden. I will come back to this project at the end of my talk. But let's first look at some key concepts underlying the Research Council endeavor. The project builds on the general hypothesis that visual technologies play an important role in orienting the human sensorium and in underpinning our worldview. By creating artworks that tap into the analog processes of imaging, my approach strives to situate analog photographic technologies in their own material discursive milieu. Or to put it in a nutshell, how do the imaging techniques operate and how are the pictorial outcomes informed by their technical condition? For example, I study imprints or vestiges that can be interpreted as traces, that bring forth a whole world. And to establish connections between those traces and the process from which they came about, I've devised experimental settings that enable studying both the interaction between the observer and the process of imaging. An empiric study of the imaging technologies may offer new insights to the underlying epistemic operations that result in traces and condition their visual appearance. Okay, I realize that first thing in the morning, this kind of scheme may be a bit abstract or overwhelming. So from now on, I will give some concrete examples of my approach. Usually the work proceeds by case studies, which are site-specific installations that show tangible evidence of the way the image traces have been fashioned. For example, the deep time deposits makes use of analog imaging techniques such as cyanotype contact prints and mud chromatograms to exhibit the non-human archival labor of the mud and the tides at the River Thames foreshore in London. Here, the blueprints and chromatograms constitute techniques of world making. In implementing documentary strategies such as the cyanotype or chromatograms for recording, tracing, and inscribing, the project juxtaposed the archival labor of the river tides with the human scale embodied by the viewer and her historical and cultural condition. Working in the tradition of the London mudlark, I searched the foreshores every day at low tide and collected debris that I placed in contact with sheets of pre-sensitized paper coated with a light-sensitive iron solution. The exposition happened on the same spot where the objects were detected during low tide. The pickings from my daily expeditions were also displayed on steel shelves under the rows of cyanotype contact prints. After being developed by washing the prints with water, the cyanotypes turn blue and show the traces left by the objects as white patterns. Experimenting with the cameraless process called blueprint or sunprint, I noticed that in addition to sunlight, the cyanotypes reacted to atmospheric humidity. Not only did the photograms record incident light and shadows cast by the debris, but they also responded to prevailing weather conditions, other than sunshine. Rain dotted the cyanotypes with big, widely spaced drops, whereas fog or fine drizzle left dense and finely granulated marks on the paper. Once I ended up exposing the papers for 45 minutes under a rainstorm, but despite the pouring rain, certain features of the debris still yielded as recognizable in the blueprints. In this work, the cyanotypes are not merely illustrations that depict found objects. Subject to sun, wind, and rain, the ferric compounds of the cyanotype were harnessed to act as weather contingent pictorial agents that built up an impressionist, or, if we will, atmospheric record of the pickings I had gathered from the bottom of the river. In evoking the narrative potential of the debris drifted ashore, both the fragments and the cyanotypes constitute blueprints of life. Together they build an archive of Instagrammatic evidence that enables us to fathom the river's anthropogenic subconscious. Reminiscent of a process that I would like to call world making, the archive creates a link between the past and the present, which testifies to the elusive and surreal nature of the flotsam and jetsam that emerge and disappear every day through tidal action. As an integral part of this installation, I often show tangible evidence of how the images, in this case the cyanotype contact prints and the mud chromatograms, have been produced. In the exhibition, 3 large flight cases occupied the front space. The cases house tools, chemicals, materials, and other evidence of the working processes, which refer to the underlying technical operation that condition the image's appearance. By displaying the imaging methods together with the resulting cyanotypes and chromatograms, the viewer was encouraged to participate in the representation of a natural event. Looking at the walls, the gallery spectator was posited as an embodied eyewitness to the spatial translation of rising and falling tides. A thin line of black gaffer tape marked the interior with the so-called chart datum, which is a mathematical 0-meter reference level that I used in this installation as a spirit level to relate the varying levels of the tides to the human being standing on the uneven gallery floor. Seen from the doorway, the 0-meter met the eye, whereas approach from the podium, the same line was only 30 centimeters above the floor plane. Starting from the lower left corner and reading the room clockwise, the tidal impressions of the River Thames created a horizontally unfurling calendar where rows of cyanotypes represented the daily levels of the low tides from January 16th through February 28th, my last day of mudlarking. The tape measures rolled out against the wall indicated the shifting levels of the high tides, which according to the tide tables varied between 5.9 to 7.3 during my residency period. Concurrently to exposing the material process that conditions the images, I wanted to highlight the beholder's share. The project focused on the act of looking, brought together inside a Victorian school building converted into a gallery. The installation invited the viewer to explore the tidal cycles as perceived from the viewpoint of a human being standing on the gallery floor. The Deep Time Deposits is a complex and richly layered project which interlinks aspects of urban, cultural, economic and social history. Starting from the workings of the water cycle, through the chemical components of the river mud, the river's corporeal and material reenactment allowed the viewer to aesthetically experience the liminal and ephemeral condition on the River Thames foreshore. The light-sensitive blueprints and the chemically generated patterns of the mud chromatograms are both examples of techniques that go by the name autographic inscriptions. Talking about my works, I often find myself in the same predicament as the so-called proto-photographers who experimented with light-sensitive materials to produce images where nature acts as a creative agent that paints itself on a flat support. In fact, the autographic methods I work with are not unlike the 19th century photographs, which introduced to the audience a whole new world of grayscale images dotted with super accurate details and also strange ghostly features. Like the early analog technologies, my installations draw from material discursive practices that leave traces by direct material-to-material contact. These vestiges or traces create medium-specific temporalities which seem to invent visual realities of their own, and in doing so, they extend beyond the bounds of visibility. Now let's switch to a project which also makes use of another type of autographic imprints, namely rubbings or frottages. These image traces are generated by the pressure of a pencil on a paper substrate. My urban exploration into Roman wall inscriptions resulted in an installation entitled Autografi di Roma, Tactile Impressions of Rome. The work comprises a collection of approximately 200 pieces of imprints and wall rubbings of various sizes, executed on substrates of recycled handmade paper. The material for the paper originated in discarded newspapers, product catalogs, and other advertisements that I gathered from various bins and recycling containers around the city of Rome. Some of the rubbings still show bits and pieces of the recycled newspapers. To produce the substrates, I started with making papier-mâché. The newspapers were first torn into small pieces and mashed into pulp with some added starch in the water to strengthen the paper mass. Then the pulp was stirred with a blender and an A5 sieve was used to press out the liquid and to size the arches. After having prepared enough material substrates, I proceeded to field work. I used two different methods, relief imprints and rubbings. The techniques implicated here borrow from two nowadays obsolete archaeological methods, originally devised for the study of antique inscriptions. The relief imprint is called epigraphic squeeze. It is produced by placing a sheet of wet paper on the stone and then pressing it tightly against the embossed pattern with a brush. Then the paper is left to dry, and when removed, it keeps the form of the stone relief. And here you see the making of a frottage. The transfer image is generated by rubbing the pencil against a dry sheet of paper. So whenever I spotted a suitable graffiti to record, I grabbed a compatible sheet of papier-mâché to cover the inscription, and from that point on, the work proceeded haphazardly and blindly. Sometimes the pressure of the pencil revealed rubbings that I otherwise would not have noticed, and vice versa, an inscription that on the first glance seemed clearly discernible would just not render itself on the substrate due to uneven wall surface or other material obstacle, such as the choice of an unsuitable pencil or too fragile sheet of paper. There were also instances when my work was suddenly interrupted by outer circumstances such as traffic, officious policemen, suspicious local inhabitants, or a furious vagrant. Recycled newspapers as material support referred to the antique tradition of acta diurna, or the daily public records, which was an urban mass media practice which consisted in erecting walls or slabs with messages inscribed in stone to inform the passerbys of official communications, matters of public interest, and sometimes even also private messages such as weddings or funerals. Placed on the same page, the display of the grey sheets portrays an illusory stone wall. A closer inspection reveals that the stones, in fact, are a product of recycled newspaper pulp, which again denotes the modern mass media. The wall installation brings together a heterogeneous collection of rubbings and squeezes derived from various locations and different time periods. The happy concoction celebrates the capacity of the rubbings and squeezes to mediate displacements in time and space, made palpable through the imprinting techniques. Browsing the collage entails an anachronistic understanding of temporality. Antique inscriptions from aqueducts and from the ruins of Via Appia meet contemporary inscriptions and graffitis such as vehicle registration plates or graffiti carvings on wood. The squeeze may even allow the researchers to identify the carver's personal style. For example, archaeology used the squeezes and calques to learn from specific aspects that are not directly visible to the naked eye. With the help of the imprint, various unclear, missing, or additional information such as weathered marks or previously undetected incisions may be unfurled and become readable. The aesthetic result is always a surprise to everyone, including the author. Faced with the intricate material aesthetic makeup of the squeezes and rubbings, the viewer is directly confronted with the underlying technical cooking process. The epigraphic squeeze, proteges, or calques enable the generation of one-to-one reliefs or contact prints, which culminate in unpredictable traces that often record more than meets the eye. In producing a replica through the direct physical contact with the actual object, the imprint adds to the phenomenal world a new dimension of autographic traces. The material transfer process replicates the physical features of the underlying object through an analog chain of operation, which translates not only the visual but also haptic aspects, such as asemiotic writing. That's why a cheap copy, in this case the fragile and lightweight piece of paper, can carry actually more information than what can be gained by looking at the original stone inscription, conceived and crafted to withstand the wearing tooth of time. The art historian Georges Didier-Huberman stresses the open-ended experimentality and the surreal aspects brought about by such archaeopoietic vestiges, that is, imprints generated mechanically without hands nor artistic style. So instead of a disegno conceived by the artist's genius invention, the rubbings on papier-mâché are product of concealed haptic image event, a material-to-material contact, which, in Didier-Huberman's words, quote, emits a technical hypothesis. Let's see what it brings out, quote closed. Now let's turn from recycled newspapers to look at the plasticity of limestone, a geological compost of millions of years of sea life, recorded in sedimentary stone through processes of petrification. Above is a cross-section of the Baltic Sea basin. Unlike mainland Sweden and Finland, where the hard granite bedrock was exposed by the Ice Age, the softer sediments such as limestone cover the southernmost islands. In Gotland, the prevailing limestone is extremely fossiliferous. Cycles of sedimentation and erosion are still active. The ongoing littoral processes constantly layer, expose, and erode the cliffs. When the cliff wall rumbles, the petrified fossils are exposed and washed down onto the beach, where the amazingly well-preserved corals can be collected with ease. These fragments date back to 400 million year old tropical sea. The seafloor of the Silurian period was awash with marine life. The tropical sea was rich in oxygen and sunlight, which stimulated the growth of enormous reef corals and huge algae. In the museum, Gotland's geological history is presented by assigning each fragment a species category, following Linnaeus' Corallia Baltica, published in 1741. The amazing fossils discovered on the beaches tickled my imagination and inspired me to challenge the Linnean analytical heritage. Instead of separating the magic corals into various species, I move in the opposite direction and put together a reef atlas that revisits the ecosystem of the ancient seafloor. In drafting an atlas that features 53 detailed ink drawings of the fossil imprints found in the museum's limestone floor slabs, my work reorganizes the depicted bits and pieces into a synthetic landscape. The ink drawings were scanned and digitally combined together to construct a cross-section that allowed the spectator to browse a fictional coral reef. The over 10-meter long panorama was printed on translucent vellum that covered the front windows of the museum entrance hall. In addition to the drawing, this site-specific installation includes 3 different volumes of the atlas, each of them dedicated to one of the museum's 3 staircases. The volumes were indexed with the Scandic letters O, Ä, and Ö, which in the Swedish language also constitute one-letter words, O for river and Ö for an island. The drawings and photographs of the atlas map out selected fossil imprints found in the museum staircases. The letter refers to the staircase, and the numbers indicate the floor and the step, in this case, 4th step from the ground floor level. During my exhibition, the stairs were converted into showcases of Gotland's geography. The drawings were mounted low and placed as close as possible to the actual fossil imprint. The whole building is pretty complex. To see all the museum exhibits, the visitor must keep climbing up and down these 3 staircases. So a closer look required a bit of a performative. Documenting the exhibition, I was surprised to find this young lady on her knees exploring the drawings. The local limestone is the most common building material. It is not only used for contemporary floor claddings, but also constitutes the material basis for all culture on the entire island. For example, inside the city walls of Visby alone, there are 10 monumental church ruins, all built of local limestone. Not to mention the famous Viking Age picture stones with myths and runic script inscribed in limestone. Here, the inventive carver has got the brilliant idea of using fossil imprints to stand for the dragon's eyes. To further study the cultural techniques related to limestone, my project includes a collaborative part entitled Whispers from the Past. Together with the local high school class and their history teacher, we visited churches in the countryside. The group was led by Sweden's top 1 runic expert, Magnus Källström, who taught us how to read and how to interpret the stone carvings. Back in Visby, the young people were encouraged to start using the runic alphabet to write messages on their own. To facilitate this part of the workshop, I came up with the method to create temporary graffiti from sticks and reeds that stand for the signs of the runic alphabet. Following some experiments that I had done earlier in Visby church ruins, the students were asked to act as ghost writers who leave secret messages drafted in an obsolete sign system that only a few of us can read. In an assignment devised by their history teacher, the students were prompted to write messages for the future. As a result of the workshop, runic script composed of sticks and other materials of the natural world emerged in Visby church ruins. These temporary graffitis were left on site for the passers-by to decipher and ultimately to disappear, blown away by the wind. At the end of the workshop, the students warmed up by doing rune gymnastics at the churchyard. They were asked to act as letters and to compose word riddles, which were then interpreted by the spectators. In this jolly experiment, the words literally became flesh. To document the project, as well as to disseminate the stores and to store its outcomes, I created a rich media exposition titled Gotland's Lithological Society. It is available online at the research catalog for artistic research. And now a short conclusion. So starting from an antique spoil heap in Rome, through the river to end up in limestone beaches of Gotland. We've dived into cyclic processes that constantly layer, expose and erode sediments of cultural and natural history, revealing vestiges of human history which unfurl aspects of time and materiality at various stages of their phenomenal existence. We have also explored material discursive practices that generate imprints through a concealed material-to-material contact. In inventing visual realities of their own, these atopic and anachronistic traces create medium-specific temporalities which seem to extend behind the bounds of visibility. Phenomena emerge within the physical and material processes of recording, only to fall again outside the scope of human cognition. A critical study of reality calls for material engagement and imagination. Concurrently to stressing the agency of the material process that conditions the mediation, we have highlighted the beholder's share. The site-specific installations show tangible evidence of how the images have been fashioned. The viewer is invited in situ and encouraged to participate in the making of the visual reality. Her gaze animates the vestiges and triggers a methodological shift between the past and the present. A performative dialogue with the spatial installation allows us to face the pictorial contingencies and to reach out for the technical unconscious underlying the traces and their visual appearance. Thank you for listening. I fooled around yesterday and on my studio in Harakka Island. So, questions?
Yeah, so now we have a... Thank you, Tuula. We have a moment for direct questions before we go to the next presentation. Maybe I want to highlight one thing while you are thinking. We nowadays often are used to think of analog as something opposite to digital. But I think your presentation showed in a very interesting way how analog is actually a logic. There's some kind of logic of rearranging various continuities. Given the fact that the prefix ana, coming from Greek language, is has the meaning of with and against. Mm-hmm. And this idea of imprint and the idea of rearranging and working with different kinds of continuities is a very interesting way of kind of complicating and showing, highlighting the logic of the analog. If you would like to open up a bit, like, or how would you describe the analog logic? Or is there something that you have been, something specific that you have been tracing?
Well, I refer to, for example, Didi Huberman, the art historian, he says that it's a question of, in these imprints where the trace is generated by this material to material contact, that's something unconscious, something that cannot be touched or cannot be explained thoroughly happens in this contact, because you cannot see between the mold and the thing that is being imprinted. And when I put my face in the snow to produce this imprint, I was just thinking whether, because I was in the imprint, I was there, like literally inside the imprint, but the eyes were closed, so there is a certain kind of blindness, but there still is this logic, and it produces, I kind of take the method and then it has its own logic, but then it's never know what the method produces, and that's probably the thing that is most of interest to me. But
yeah, sounds like you are complicating the dichotomy between continuity and discrete units. So somehow, even in analog processes, we are dealing with some form of gaps. At least the moments of translation and rearranging, there is always something that goes beyond the continuity. Maybe, do you have any other questions?
No? Yes. Thank you. So thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned that, especially at the beginning, this concept of world making as one of the key concepts of your work. I was wondering, which concept of world are you operating with when you use this term world making?
yeah, it's as I said, it's a rather grand title. I perhaps should not have used that word, but since I've used it, so I have to stick with it and bear the consequences. So I mean, like what we consider as reality, like the visual reality, but in the Gotland case also because it's the whole culture is so much based on this limestone, which is the bedrock of the so it's even bigger somehow. I think in that case it really is the fossil and the bedrock. The limestone is really world making for the whole society in a very material way, because the culture, all the traces, the buildings, the picture stones and the ruins, it's all recorded in limestone. So that there is a material aspect of the what I could call world making.
If I remember right, the world making doesn't appear in the Finnish title of your project, or is it?
No.
No. So can you say the Finnish title of the project?
I think I translated kuvien maailma ja näkyvyyden ehdot. So it's more like the world of images and the conditions of vision or visual conditions of images. So it's perhaps I made this mistake using a rather grand title. It could have been simpler.
Hello, thank you. This was very interesting. So this isn't really a question as much as it is an observation. So just kind of feel free to comment. So a lot of the things you showed and the discourse kind of circled around things which are traditionally associated with photography. So fossils, imprints, and so on. But then it seems that the work itself isn't really interested in the kind of causal. The causal chains, which arguably kind of activate these forms, but rather in the performance of constructing causal chains. So I was just wondering whether this work, and just in general, would it really be interesting for you to discuss it as a kind of non-anthropocentric form of performance? Because analog is obviously a human kind of concept, right? And the difference between analog and digital is that digital is simply not for humans. In a sense, we live in an analog world. And so analog imagery is the kind of type of imagery that we humans interact with. And so much of the work is really about reenacting or reconstructing or manifesting these causal chains. And then, on the other hand, perhaps bringing to our attention the fact that many causal chains are a performance of forces other than ourselves. So a non-anthropocentric form of kind of world making or image making?
Yeah, true. Especially in the London example, since it was, as I said, it was kind of atmospheric record of the weather. Actually, that was like maybe more interesting than the what is usually kind of what we are after when we use the blueprints or cyanotypes. That is the shadows of the objects, so that we can read the objects. But there was also the weather, which was very dominant in those images, and I also the fact that I brought the weather from the outside inside a building. So yes, there's like a lot of causal changes happening, and I hope that the visitor kind of in moving in the space can also read those step by step, as in the museum, like literally step by step.
Yes, I think I would like to add one thing. I think the installation Deep Time Deposit was a very good example of successful strategy of building into the installation the kind of reading instructions for the viewer, like creating enough entry points and background information and somehow preconditions for understanding the material processes. But I know that it's this kind of paragonal elements, like the boxes with the equipment and stuff, don't fit easily into the contemporary art context. So I heard earlier so somehow the white cube context can easily, like, clearly inhabit this kind of spatial temporal texts with its own reading instructions, but it's not always like the mainstream of contemporary art expectations. Or how would you see it? Like, you have managed to solve it in a very elegant way, but is it a struggle or?
Yeah, it's been a struggle. I just really wonder why this is a struggle. I mean, I was very surprised, say in the Helsinki Biennale, when the Deep Time Deposits was installed the second time. First time it was very size specific in London because it was inside the Victorian gallery, a Victorian school building converted to gallery, which was like 100 meters from the river. So it was like everything, the historical context was there. So that was not a white cube, even if it was a gallery actually, because it was part of the installation was that. But then in the Helsinki Art Museum, it definitely was in the white cube context. Okay, we managed to solve, in my mind, the high tides and the low tides and things like that, but what Mika called the script. But yes, then I had to kind of fight to have the flight cases and the boxes in the space, because the curator wasn't happy with them. So her proposal was to remove this stuff away because it's somehow disturbed her, and I still don't understand why. But okay, this was a bit of not a struggle, but then I kind of kept my because I can't just cut part of the work away, but I still don't see what the problem is.
Yeah, maybe this struggle tells something about the kind of infra-thin difference between art and artistic research. I don't know.
Okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
Could be.
Now we have used the 45 minutes. Thanks, Tuula. And at the end of this session, we will have hopefully still a moment of coming back to all 4 presentations.
Okay.
So if you have time, please stay until then. Now the next talk will be by Ari Tanhuanpää, and we will change the presentation and continue right away. And after Ari's presentation, we will have a short break. So, welcome, Ari. I think everything is set.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Ari Tanhuanpää. I usually work at Finnish National Gallery, but this year I have worked as a postdoc researcher at this university. In my presentation, I will examine some of the themes of George Didi Uberman, some themes of his work and their connection to the philosophies of Gilles Deleuze and Jean-Luc Marion. This scholar works at the School for Advanced Studies in the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, abbreviation EHES, in Paris. In his critique of pure reason, Immanuel Kant listed the transcendental conditions a priori, categories of understanding defining the domain of possible experience, when a central element in Kant's theory was the transcendental subject. Deleuze tried to map an impersonal transcendental field. He sought the conditions of real, not merely possible, experiences, conditions that do not precede the experiences but are formed together with them. And Deleuze described the principle he called transcendental empiricism as plasticity that, contrary to Kant's formal conditions, is not wider than its conditions, which is metamorphosed with the conditioned and which is determined in each case with what it determines. In this light, art historian Bertrand Prévost's remark is particularly interesting. He says that, like other art historians working at EHES in Paris, Didi Uberman presents himself as an art historian and philosopher. It is not a question of two labels attached, designating two intellectual fields that would respond to and complement each other, but of a way of giving a professional formula to the Deleuzian transcendental empiricism. Now, Gilles Deleuze was very critical of Kant's philosophy, which he considered to represent a dogmatic image of thought. For example, when Kant thought that our ability to think is innate, Deleuze claimed that we begin to think only when something in the world forces us to think. This something is not an object of recognition, as in Kant, but thinking is only initiated by what he called a fundamental encounter. Deleuze claimed that an identifiable object of experience cannot elicit the transcendental exercise of the faculties. Only a sign or a problematic idea can do so. Plato stated in his Republic that there are two kinds of things, those which do not disturb thought, and those which force us to think. That which forces thought is the coexistence of contraries, that is, paradoxes. Deleuze claimed that what is encountered in the fundamental encounter is sentiendum, the being of a sensible which can only be sensed but is simultaneously imperceptible. He stated that the fundamental encounter sets our faculties into motion and raises each of them to the level of a transcendental exercise, in which each faculty apprehends something which concerns it exclusively, which it alone can grasp, yet which is ungraspable from the point of view of its empirical exercise. Didi Uberman has mentioned in one of his interviews that he loves images that make him speechless. And that is the most radical experience when confronting an image. Speechlessness is a hallmark of undergoing a fundamental encounter. Sigmund Freud wrote that Michelangelo's sculpture depicting Moses had caused him to stand silently in front of it every day for 3 weeks. And in one of his famous case studies, Freud tells about his female patient named Dora, who had remained 2 hours in front of a famous Sistine Madonna, wrapped in silent admiration. When Freud asked her what had pleased her so much in the painting, she could not find any clear answer. But finally she said, the Madonna. One of the psychoanalysts very close to Didi Uberman was Pierre Fédida, who wrote that Dora's pronunciation, Madonna, did not name anything. It produced the image only insofar as it pronounced the silence of the word. What we call an image is the effect produced by language in its suddening, deafening. And here we come to a painting Didi Uberman discusses in his Confronting Images, Fra Angelico's Annunciation, a 15th century fresco in the monastery of San Marco in Florence. From a traditional art historical point of view, the painting is not particularly interesting. There isn't much to see, as Didi Uberman puts it. There is the Archangel Gabriel and Virgin Mary, but that's all. No interesting details for an iconographical or iconological analysis. However, Didi Uberman draws his attention to one specific detail. The angel's lips are closed. So how can he announce anything when his mouth is shut? And here we come to the paradox of incarnation. Gabriel's annunciation that Mary would conceive and bear a son through a virgin birth and become the mother of Jesus Christ does not occur in an empirical dimension, but in a transcendental silence. This silence, together with the whitewashed cell, signifies hospitality to the coming of the Holy Other, a theme discussed in negative theology prominent in Didi Uberman. This can also be understood as welcoming receptivity to the event which constitutes what André Maldinet called transpassibility. At the beginning of his Confronting Images, originally Devant l'Image, Didi Uberman presents his credo, a view of the object of study in art history, which is the complete antithesis of a positive science. The historian no longer finds himself facing a circumscribed object, but rather something like a liquid or gas expansion, a cloud without outlines that changes shape constantly as it passes overhead. According to Didi Uberman, art history is dominated by the tyranny of the visible and legible. Contrary to that, before the Annunciation, he urges us to momentarily leave behind everything that we thought we saw and identified, and return to the very conditions of the gaze, conditions which do not, however, precede the gaze. He says that before the fresco, we must go back to the initial setting, where we found ourselves against the white, because before we identified Archangel Gabriel and Virgin Mary, we saw just white. When we entered the whitewashed cell, we were blinded by the light. This white can't be an object of serious research because there's not anything we could analyze and identify. But Didi Uberman urges us to stay a moment longer before the image. This way, curiosity of details of representation gradually diminishes, and a certain unease, a certain disappointment begins to dim the clarity of our gazes. This stopping before the image requires a gaze that would not draw close only to discern and recognize, to name what it grasps at any cost, but would first distance itself a bit and abstain from clarifying everything immediately. It requires suspended attention, a prolonged suspension of a moment of reaching conclusions. To stand before the image is to stand before the white, which in Didi Uberman's reading is a figure of this evenly suspended attention. And this is Freud's term by which he meant that in psychoanalytic session, this suspended attention allows the analyst to discover the unconscious connections in what the analysand says. Thanks to it, the analyst is able to keep in mind a multitude of apparently insignificant elements whose correlations are only to emerge later on. The excessive flux of excitation, the dazzlement caused by the white, immediately halts the operation of the Freudian pleasure principle, obligating the psychical apparatus to carry out a more urgent task beyond the pleasure principle. Didi Uberman emphasizes that the white is not nothing, and again an implicit reference to Maldinet. It has a certain reality. He says that it is material, a stream of luminous particles in one case, a powder of chalky particles in the other. He calls it the visual, le visuel. The involuntary epoche, the white accomplishes, requires silence. Didi Uberman tells us that when entering the church of the monastery of San Marco, the faithful found themselves faced with an impressive effigy painted above the door. Saint Peter, with the finger on his lip, demanding silence. And here we come back to transcendental empiricism. the relationship between the speech and the silence is not contradictory, but differential. They are in a reciprocal relationship. As philosopher Jean-Louis Chrétien said, silence and speech belong to one another. There cannot be any silence except for a creature of a speech. Silence cannot manifest itself except to someone who can speak. In his book, Blanc Souci, Didi Uberman discusses Esther Schalefgertz's video installation based on interviews with about 60 survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Didi Uberman draws attention to the fact that the artist captured not only their speech, but also and especially the silent moments that occurred between their words, crucial to the acts of witnessing. He says that these determinate silences, that is, silences of the survivors, refer to the burning desire to open the limits of the sayable even further. That is, to make it transcendental. So, the sayable, the being of the sayable, eloquendum, as Deleuze called it. Though it is silent, it is not a negation of speech, but its virtual or transcendental dimension. Didi Uberman says that when the witness breaks off in his story and for a moment lets silence reign, the story comes through in spite of all. Just as the white blank in Fra Angelico's fresco is not nothing, the blanks, gaps in the Holocaust survivors' speech are no less not nothing. Didi Uberman says that white in Fra Angelico does not pertain to a representational code. On the contrary, it opens representation. It is a symptom of mystery, the mystery of incarnation that draws the gaze beyond the eye, the visible beyond itself, to visibility, le visuel. That is a virtual or transcendental dimension of the visible. Visibility is nothing visible. However, Didi Uberman also examined incarnation from a broader perspective. He says that in each particular image, the incarnational question finds a provisional, a fragile, a lacunary, a paradoxical answer. That is to say, a problematic answer. When operating in this transcendental field, we face problems that are unsolvable, which, according to Deleuze, is the characteristic feature of true problems. The problematicity of such problems does not disappear with their solutions. but continues to insist within their provisional solutions the manner in which they function as imperatives. In art history and aesthetics, the question of an image is often reduced to the question of what the image is or what is in the image. But that's not a true problem. The true problem of the image is that the image is, or more precisely, that there are escaped Ilya images. Another true problem is visibility, le visuel. Didi Huberman says that le visuel sublates the false opposition between the visible and the invisible. Actually, there are two tendencies in le visuel or visibility. One force pushing it towards the visible, the other towards the invisible. Le visuel is neither visible nor invisible, but invisible of the visible. But if we come back to Francesco's white, one could also call it a saturated phenomenon. This term is launched by the French philosopher Jean-Luc Marion. A few words of intentionality. We constitute every object we encounter in a certain type of intentional act. Our intending is first empty, but it tends to be fulfilled. To do so, one has to presentificate the object one intends. The aim is that the meaning, intention aimed at the object, and the intuition, the object we perceive, would coincide, which will lead to the total fulfillment of our meaning intention. Edmund Husserl called it evidence. However, Marion emphasizes that this fulfillment always remains more or less incomplete. The total fulfillment is realized only in those domains where the intention requires merely a pure or formal intuition in order to be fulfilled in a phenomenon, like in mathematics and formal logic. Then Kant argued that all phenomena are constituted by the transcendental ego, who gives a phenomenon the right to appear within a limit of predetermined horizon, and that no other had the right to manifest. Marion says that such phenomena are poor in intuition. He claims that there are phenomena where there is excess of intuition over intention. He uses the Transfiguration of Christ, here Raphael's famous painting, as one of his examples. The Apostle Mark describes this event. The Christ's clothes became resplendent, excessively white, the likes which no fuller on earth could bleach. In this unpredictable event, the eyes of the apostles saw nothing distinctly, but experienced their importance before the excessiveness of the visible. Marion reminds us, however, that even when dazzled, it is not a question of the eyes not seeing anything. When the apostles encountered transfiguration, they saw Christ, but they could not direct their gazes on him. Their eyes met their naked impotence. A pathetic moment. The suffering that the prisoners who entered the dazzling light from the darkness overgave also experienced in Plato's allegory. I suggest that pushed to their limits, the apostles suffered what seeing as such is like, videndum. The saturated phenomenon refuses to let itself be looked at as an object, precisely because it appears with a multiple and indescribable excess that suspends any effort at constitution. Mario distinguishes between the idol, between the idol and the icon. Here he follows Emmanuel Levinas, who made a distinction between the face and the facade. Marion writes, when the idol appears, the gaze has just stopped. The idol concretizes that stop. Before the idol, the gaze transparently transpires the visible. The gaze did not see the visible since it did not cease to transpire it. Through the idol, the visible finally becomes visible to the gaze, because the visible dazzles the gaze. The idol fills the intention of the gaze, which wants nothing other than to see. It allows no invisibility. This represents what Didi Ubermans calls tyranny of the visible. To exemplify this, he uses the Byzantine golden altarpiece Palladoro of the Basilica of San Marco in Venice. He says that when a medieval believer encountered the altarpiece, he was not able to distinguish anything, any detail, or to describe to anyone exactly what he saw. He encountered only the splendor of gold and enamels. This splendor was not an immanent feature of the altarpiece separate from its viewer. It was formed in the interaction of his gaze, his movements, and the altarpiece. Didi Huberman feels that nowadays, when the altar is overexposed by the powerful spotlights, all this has been lost. In Marion's terms, the altarpiece has become a facade or an idol. What is lost is the gaze that faces at us from it. What is lost is the icon that does not result from a vision, but provokes one. This can be compared to what Didi Uberman says about fireflies in his other work. He borrows this figure from Divine Comedy, where Dante tells of souls condemned to hell who emit a barely perceptible light comparable to the glimmer of fireflies. And from Pier Paolo Pasolini's essay L'articolo delle lucciole, where the poet and director mourned the loss of the fireflies lucciole, which he used as a metaphor for political resistance, but also for the decline of experience in the spirit of Walter Benjamin and Giorgio Agamben. Didi Uberman points out, however, that even such an experience is not nothing. It is still an experience of the decline of experience. The fireflies had not disappeared. Pasolini had just lost sensitivity to see them. The light emitted by the fireflies is very weak. One must enter their natural habitat at night to find their surviving community, because when the darkness is at its deepest, we can grasp even the slightest glimmer. Here the firefly also acts as a figure for Benjamin's dialectical image, wherein what has been comes together in a flash with a now to form a constellation. Here we can also find an implicit reference to Henry Bergson's metaphor of intuition as a lamp almost extinguished, which only glimmers now and then. Or we can recall how Goethe advised us to look at the Laocoon sculpture. One should place oneself before it, first with one's eyes closed, then open the eyes and shut them again instantly. As an alternative to this, he recommended viewing the sculpture in the light of a flickering torch. The view that opens up in the glimmer of the fireflies is equally intermittent. All it offers to see is not all. Didi Uberman claims that the all image, toute image, would be a fetish or an idol that forms a screen, an image that is not all, but instead offers a true icon. Such were the glimpses offered by the photographs secretly taken by a member of Sonderkommando, a special unit of Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz-Birkenau, for quick snapshots from hell. Didi Uberman emphasizes that precisely their incompleteness and imperfection allow us to see, because even more important than what we discern in these photos is the fact that they are. The aperture of Kant's formal conditions of experience is too large. It lacks sufficient resolution to give us the real conditions of what happened. Before these contact prints, we cannot avoid direct contact with the Holocaust. They give space to what Bertrand Prevost calls impossible imagination. Our imaginative power reaches its extreme limit through the photos and becomes transcendental. The sentiendum of these photos creates an image of something that our imaginative faculty cannot produce an image. This impossible imaging, Bill Gable, is the effect of a fundamental encounter with the being of the sensible. Thank you.
Thanks, Ari, for rich and interesting, very interesting talk. Now we have a short moment for reactions, comments. Maybe I can start highlighting again one thing. You highlighted very interestingly the silence and speech, and you quoted Didi Huberman saying that he loves images that make him speechless. And I started to think, how would you see writing in this constellation? Like you also brought up the Benjamin quote where he notes that image flashes up, it comes into its readability in a flash-like moment. And he also writes that writing is the thunder that comes afterwards. So how would you place writing in this scheme of yours?
I would think that writing is as difficult as speaking. To find the right words. And also if they think this witnessing of Auschwitz survivors, so it is as difficult to speak as it is as difficult to write about it. And of course, this is not only Didi Huberman's view, but also, for instance, Jean-François Lyotard has talked about it, and Benjamin has written about the soldiers who gave back from the First World War, who had lost their communicative skills. So they have undergone a certain fundamental encounter, I would say, that made them speechless. Yeah.
Thanks. There is one question.
Thank you. It's rather a comment, and I thank you, Mika, also for the question, because it was something that I was thinking, and something that struck me when you show the Fra Angelico image at the entrance of the monastery, because there are two gestures. The one is what you mentioned, what you indicate, what you point to, the silence. The other one is the writing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, after your question and after your answer to the question, if forms of writing can be developed that receive words instead of creating them. So a radical form of aesthetic witnessing, which in which writing acts as a kind of seismographer, creating signs of a signless, I would call it, fundamental encounter or aesthetic experience. And I wonder if new development in language-based artistic research are actually reacting to this possibility.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but I haven't thought about that, and I see this figure just like a figure of epoche. That stops the gaze and stops speaking, and that's maybe we could also see that it gives us a doorway to transcendental.
Yeah, maybe I would like to add to this still another angle. This might be a bit simplifying, but how would you react if like you now ended with the question of transcendental, and you highlighted in the talk in very clear terms the idea of the transcendental empiricism. And if you think the difference of speech and writing, so it's empirically possible to look at something and speak at the same time, but it's impossible empirically to look at something and draw something and look at the line you draw in the same time. So there is a kind of structural difference on this level, but it's on an empirical realm. But how would you translate this into this transcendental empiricism, difference between speech and writing?
Well, I haven't thought about that at all. But
yeah, somehow one reference behind is of course Derrida's making a portrait.
Yes.
And how was it called? His ideas of blindness. Blindness in the context of an exhibition he curated, and there he uses the drawing, an extreme case of drawing and portrait of oneself as the place where the impossibility of seeing what is depicted and the picture at the same time. and since Didi Huberman is well informed about Derrida and uses many kinds of ideas from Derrida in dialogue with him, at least indirectly. So I wonder how he balances between Derrida and Deleuze. Yeah.
It's difficult to say, well, Didi Huberman does not make many references to transcendental empiricism in his work. There are only maybe one or two references in his lectures, I think. But and it's a and I base my interpretation that his work represents transcendental empiricism to Bertrand Prévost's interpretation, and that's a very interesting question. Where can we find signs of transcendental empiricism in Didi Huberman's work? And I have tried to find them, but I would say that this work is in process still. So.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we can leave it here. We will now have a short break before Maiju's presentation. Thank you, Ari.
Thanks.
Tästä. Joo. Okei. Saanko... Okei. Valmis.
Okay, we are back after a short break, and Maiju Loukola will give her talk now. Welcome, Maiju, and go ahead.
Thanks, Mika, and thanks everyone. So good late morning. I'm Maiju Loukola, University Lecturer in Artistic Research at KuvA here in doctoral program. I'm also with the KONE-funded research project called City as Space of Rules and Dreaming, combining perspectives from arts and artistic research, urban planning theories, and architecture, law, and political theory. In the project, we ask, among other things, how is urban space formed and shared, and who has access to it? And what normative and de facto instruments regulate, control and inhabit this space? The project is coming to its end mid next year-ish. So the title of my talk today is Anti-Ruinous Activity Alone Allowed in the Soon Past Future. Speculations through city space practices. So I will discuss some hanging entries around ruins and a bit of practice through ruins. I'll talk about ruins and ruinance in the context of city space, and how something that might be identified as rhetorical ruinance, retorinen raunioittaminen, seems to have taken over the debates also related to the distribution of city space and how it's governed, shared, held, and lived. This slide is thinking about ruins. This oftentimes is what comes before mind's eye. The image is from Palmyra, Syria. And I'll leave it there, and my presentation, just to say, is quite minimalistic composition in terms of visual presentation, and more so a verbal one. Hang in there, please. So an intro side note, ruins on one hand can be precious and valuable, in need of protection, respect, care, defending, and on the other hand, things and conditions that ruin things in the sense of destruction and decay. In Finnish, there's also a word, ruinata, which, coming out of the mouth of a person younger than me, can refer to the destructive, to something that becomes spoiled or failed. Älä ruinaa tätä juttua. Ruinata also means to pester somebody for money, ruinata rahaa. So there's the mini etymological ABC there. My talk today is not so much about ancient sites or cultures or mushrooms either, but more touching ruins and language that to my mind form a peculiar, lovely and vicious couple whose spatialities and temporalities are somewhat unhinged. Another important side note, the topic of the talk relates to a larger collaborative artistic research-based initiative that has ruins as one of its figures. And my talk today is a work phase speculation of that. The larger collective is a thinking space by a group of people, dear colleagues, Halonen, Ruuska, Hirvola, Tiensuu, involved in the City as Space of Rules and Dreaming research project. And the talk especially links to the project's planned afterlife. And today's thought play with ruins belong to my own criminal record only and cannot be blamed on anyone else. So I'll proceed along three entries. Entry 1. 2 moves with and around the concept of ruin in relation to their spatial and temporal derivatives. First, spatial, as in related to how actual city space can easily and rightly so be contested in such degree that a single peninsula in Tuula region in Helsinki, namely the Taivanlahti Peninsula, has been in dispute for a good 20 years between the city of Helsinki, who governs the land and who governs the governance of the land. And the Helsinkians, that is the residential association and other citizen activists. After many turns, a spa hotel has been in the planning for the site since 2009. In short, City of Helsinki has made a deal with the German investment company whose plans have been expanding in scale enormously per each exceptional permit round, which have been many, in ways that will radically change the culturally valuable landscape. In the role of rhetorical ruinance in such process, like Taivalahti case, to my mind, maybe holds an open invitation, if not an urgent call, for a language correction that could be recognized and put into action well more efficiently, well experimentally, spectacularly. And two, temporal, as in how in such distribution of city space, including actual and very pragmatic city planning processes, just like the case Taivalahti, how, despite the golden futures they promise to the residents, common people, middle class, upper class, children, parents, elderly, visitors, dogs, everybody, except, of course, in actuality, not everybody, but that's another big issue. So how the profit-driven distribution of city space processes actually plain right just result as born as ruin outcomes when the success of a development project is measured by speculative numbers and speculative numbers only. This said in a slightly polemical tone, instead of points such as preservation of cultural value, ecological sustainability, citizens' sense of belonging to their city. So this said, from the point of view shamelessly supporting the peninsula remaining as open public citizen space and not a ruin of the soon past future that will be likely to demolish for good the now existing, and in the future we would say the once having existed, people's urban nature reservoir. Ta-da! So this image is a poster by the French graphic artist Gérard Paris-Clavel, Ciel Terre. Paris-Clavel, his artistic repertoire includes signs to demonstrations. And for me this image is a declaration of. And I just realized that also this red and yellow little tape is made by Gérard. And it somehow depicts him as a person, as an artist. He's an utopist, in standing utopist in many ways. So entry 2, intervening by reading a daytime story from a book by philosopher Hans Ruin from Södertörn University, Sweden. And as a mini intro, Hans Ruin writes about how life loses itself in language and how in language life reenacts a distance to itself and thus becomes ruined. And I quote, a long quote. In a short essay, The Ruins from 1907, George Simmel sought after what a ruin is and what is the source of its fascination all about. He placed before us an image of a supreme expression of the work of the spirit in nature, a stone construction, and wrote how its decline was a reenactment of a cosmic tragedy in which nature takes revenge of the violation performed by the spirit. Simmel goes on saying that the ruin is not only an enactment of a supratemporal tragedy of life, but it's also a privileged image of history. The ruin is the most present form of the past, and in a concluding passage, Simmel suggests that the peculiar fascination of this image of the past is itself historically situated. Decadent times characterized by an increased plurality, sensibility, and capacity for understanding, are also times when the spirit recognizes itself as the focal point of mutually contradicting and ultimately leveling forces. The time when the spirit does not experience itself as a creative force, but only as a repetitive representing capacity, is also the time when a ruin will be most meaningful. For in these times, life itself experiences itself as inescapable ruination. Simmel does not speak here of romanticism nor of historicism as such, yet his short essay, The Ruins, gathers precisely these themes, as it seeks to portray an entire spiritual situation of increased historical awareness, as also a time of weakness and a tendency towards a certain melancholy. Our fascination for the ruins, or the ruin, is also a historical index for what and where we are. We are the ones dominated by the sense of our inescapable destruction. And entry 3. And this is, if not also appeared in the previous parts, this is the most monotonic part of the talk, entry 3. So back to rhetorical ruinance, retorinen raunioittaminen, with a small rant and a little assignment that I did for this purpose. Language of decision-making processes balances factual facts with contradictions and dissenting opinions in accordance with whatever serves the desired and/or predetermined purpose, oftentimes. Rhetorical ruinance or ruining refers to the use of language in which the correspondence to reality is constructed to match the need. In Finnish we have this word mittatilaus, so you could think of that as a mittatilauskieli, mittatilausretoriikka. Perhaps this kind of language or rhetorics could be sold as by meter, as metritavara. But hey, we have consultants, so that is sort of taken care of. It has been cleaned up of all of the palpable, hesitating and critical. It looks neutral, yet is anything but. So to the assignment. The assignment goes like this. First phase, choose an excerpt from the many papers produced along the administrative process of case Taivanlahti in the archives of City of Helsinki, estate or planning or administration. Phase 2, choose means for reenacting the text. First use translator, read out loud, then apply rules. First substitute every 7th word with cultural value. Secondly, substitute every 9th word with wonderful. And thirdly, substitute every 21st word with rosebud. Read out loud. So the excerpt that I chose is from the Helsinki City Town Plan Department's description of the change in the town plan, Taivanlahti 13 and 14 city region, issue number 11290, in year 2004, issue 3, sub-issue 3.1, the general objectives of the City of Helsinki. Kohta 3. There's a short piece I read in Finnish. Apologies for everybody non-Finnish, but we will go back English very shortly after that. Kohta 3. Asemakaavan muutoksen tavoitteet. 3.1. Kaupungin yleiset tavoitteet. Hietarannan Taivanlahden alueen asemakaavan muutoksen tavoitteena on antaa alueelle edellytyksiä kehittyä virkistyksen ja vapaa-ajan vieton alueena, liittää alue entistä paremmin olemassa oleviin reitistöihin ja katuverkkoon, Hietarantaa kehitetään kantakaupungin tärkeimpänä uimarantana ja luontevana osana kantakaupungin virkistyskäytössä olevaa läntistä rantavyöhykettä. Kaupungin tavoitteena on ollut jo useita vuosia monipuolistaa kaupungin toimintojen kirjoa, esimerkiksi ehdotetulla kylpylärakennuksella. Rakennukselle on aiemminkin yritetty löytää sopivaa paikkaa Helsingin keskusta-alueen tuntumasta. First task, shifting of meaning and expected shake of logistics of the language used. I simply fed the piece of text into the mouth of MOT translator, one commonly used also in academic context. And this is what she or they spit out. Part 3. The objectives of the standing change. 3.1. General objectives of the city. The objective of the change in the town plan of the Hietaranta-Taivalahti area is to. The aim is to provide the area with conditions for the development of recreational and leisure activities as an area of Vietnam to better connect the area to existing routings, HIN and the street network. The sand beach will be developed as the most important beach in the inner city and as a natural part of the inner city's recreational western, the coastal zone. For many years, the city's goal has been to half of the city's range of activities, for example, in the proposed spa at the building. In the past, attempts have been made to find a suitable located near the Helsinki city center area. Next task, I added 3 rules that I had agreed with myself. Part 3, the objectives of the standing change. 3.1. Cultural value objectives of the city. The objective of wonderful cultural value change in the Rosebud town plan of the cultural value wonderful Hietaranta-Taivalahti area is 2. The cultural value aim is wonderful to provide Rosebud, the area cultural value with conditions for the wonderful development of cultural value, recreational and leisure activities as wonderful area cultural Rosebud value of Vietnam to better connect the wonderful area to cultural value existing routines. HIN and the street wonderful network. The Rosebud cultural value sand beach will be developed as the cultural value, wonderful value, most important beach in the inner city, cultural Rosebud value, and as wonderful natural part of the inner cultural value cities, recreational western, the wonderful coastal zone, cultural value Rosebud. For many years, the city's goal has wonderful cultural value been to half of the city's cultural value range of wonderful Rosebud activities, for example, in the proposed city value spa at the building. In the past cultural value attempts have Rosebud made to wonderful find a cultural value suitable, located near the Helsinki wonderful city center cultural value area. And there could be phases from 1 to 999 and more following that process. References somewhat clear. Oulipo, my all-time favorite French association of potential literature, playing with rules, producing seemingly nonsensical text that creates a logic and a shine sphere of meaning of its own. Margret's Cécile Pip, Susanna Kuparinen's Valtuusto trilogy, 3 theatre performances, the dialogue of which was captured straight out of the City Council meeting transliterations, and many more. So maybe next phase, if I would continue the task on and on and on, would be to form a collective called Architects with Opinions and infiltrate into urban administration and city planning organs to ensure that ruins are protected whenever there is a proper cause, and that future ruins are either carefully protected or effectively prevented whenever there is a proper cause for either, and a meaningful alternative, one that develops the site in dispute to a direction where values other than dollar count in true measure. No bullshit, no more-ism, anti-ruinous activity only. Please welcome, let's go. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Maiju. Now we have some time for comments, discussion, questions. Maybe I just highlight thanks. It was a hilarious way of expanding the scope of meaning of ruins from a family name to Finnish connotations. It's very nice.
Can I respond quickly to that also? That also might be, it's somehow, mikä toi on toi Möbius strip again appears in the room, that it's an ongoing, contradiction and paradox of paradoxes, like is it ruination of meaning or ruination of discourse, of playing with these kinds of connotations, like being fascinated. Hunt Ruin has been writing about ruins, so I'm talking about ruins, so of course I'm visiting Hunt Ruin. Yeah.
So please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask something. You mentioned that is the relation to class. You said something about middle class people being in relation to these cityscapes. And I was wondering, I had a thought about property in that relation, as in terms of also ownership, or like who owns, or like neglect, or the lack of ownership or property causing the ruins, and this kind of something like an absence that is there that contributes to the ruins. Do you have any? I mean, also, what it has to do with the people who live in certain areas and their ability to own something or not, or to. Do you know what I mean? I'm asking about the relation of people who live in a place and property or ownership, and something becoming a ruin because, for example, the ownership is unclear, so there's no one's properties, and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment. Plenty of examples. In many scales, there's one option or one example that comes to my mind. Well, it actually has an owner, the Lastenlinna Hospital in Töölö also. Lots of things happening in Töölö or not. And it was also a very contested site, that it's a sort of a national treasure in sense of architecture and in the sense of the Nobel children, mikä on lastenlääkäri, pediatrician hero who hosted that hospital originally, and then getting into bad condition, and the owner, Helsinki city, didn't want to invest money, and the HUS, the Helsinki region hospital, bought it, and then again many years, and it's the wonderful ornaments are almost dropping on your head when you walk past the building, and there's been a super complicated and long and lame process or negotiation going around that case. And now there was some news. I realized that there's some kind of initiative to turn it into housing property, at least partly. And now I'm not answering your question, but and then the Taivanlahti Peninsula case that I was referring to, somewhat in the talk is sort of also contested, and it's interesting to me and many people, because it's sort of Helsinki has a rare thing of having the seashores quite in quite big extent still public and not owned by companies, but it's gradually going towards the direction that these best places are sold, because it's good money and so on. So did I at all answer to your question? Thanks. Yeah.
Any other reactions, comments?
Thank you. Really wonderful. Particularly, I love the word, the kind of how turning the kind of this sort of official word salad into a kind of much more kind of tangibly a word salad, I guess. But a number of things also in terms of language, maybe something, but maybe I'll leave that for now. The question of ruins, it made me think of this sort of romantic architectural kind of imaginary of ruins, of classical ruins, and the kind of how this approach to architecture is something that is set to also run through modernity, and this kind of idea of linearity that is built into this idea of linear time, or the kind of inevitability of the ruin, is something that it got me thinking. And I was wondering of this, really just thinking aloud now, of this sort of neoliberal capitalism's kind of acceleration maybe of this, and still kind of this same, that in a way the kind of inevitability of the ruin is built into these projects. So is this something that I kind of read this as a kind of in between the lines in your thinking? Is this something that you've been also, that you that resonates with you in terms of the ruin?
Yeah, thanks for the comment and the question. Yes, very much so. And I'm not sure if I sort of managed to explicate that clear enough, but somehow the thinking about the future ruins or construction or development processes that are in the planning, and somehow I see there in many cases the horizon of something that is constructed and appears brand new is already a demolished ruin, and not only as that, if we say that it's a building, not only the building as such, but somehow along with the process there goes a lot of cultural value in terms of lost trees and lost somehow scenery or that has cultural value or so, and that is really recognized, and it's not just nostalgic Töölö people wanting to have the place untouched forever for themselves. So I think that's a tendency that goes on very many levels or in many ways. In somehow, in 70s, 80s, very quick, fast building of bad, poor material, and then these buildings turn in actuality into ruins, and they have to be bombarded down and build something new quickly again.
And I think that kind of idea of this made me think of kind of return to this thought that I had, but I forgot to articulate, that the kind of idea, this romantic idea of the kind of nature taking over.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of built-in this idea that nature is going to, in a way, take over after all, that there's this sort of that sort of small human thing will just turn into a ruin. And this kind of gets a kind of quite sort of dark undertone now with this sort of accelerated development that is very much part of actually ruining, destroying actually the kind of nature and these sort of the ecosystems in a process that is driven with this idea. Somehow there's this underlying thought that somehow the nature will survive. It's, I think there's something kind of very nihilistic somehow that we can cause this ruin because actually the kind of in the end our impact is so small and the kind of nature or the planet will survive.
Yeah.
I don't know if this resonates, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it does. And actually, I've been involved in I maybe jump a little bit on the sidetrack responding to your comment, but I've been involved into artistic projects or artistic gestures maybe, or events taking place in this Taivanlahti Peninsula in recent years, and I was a little bit wary of talking about those because they were especially the latter one this May was a collaboration with Henna-Riikka Halonen, so and she had a big part in the sort of the non-human, post-humanistic or more than human angle in that she made as part of the collaboration or the intervention we made there, her part was AI generated story creation and a little bit radio play kind of kuunneltava asia that took us to the future times where the nature has been taking over or starts taking over the site after we have failed in doing anything respectful with the site. So yeah.
When you decided to broken this bureaucratic language, so I understand that it's some kind of method, and but does this matter to you anything in which kind of word you decided to use, like a rosebud or and how you find it or what? Yeah,
thanks, very good question, Minna. It matters. This was sort of test, well, not test drive, I've been doing it earlier, but it was to somehow to present the method in a very quick way, but within the group or with the group we have been talked a lot about, and what interests me super much is that how when we have sort of the expertise of someone in city planning, like Aino Hirvola is an architect and background in planning theories, or his expertise include planning theories and all these kinds of, and knowledge of how in practice, like in Helsinki city planning office, these procedures go. So I'm thinking that it is worthwhile really strongly to try to make that sort of happen in real life, and not in the, well, partly in an artistic project context, but using the artistic sort of means or methods, whatever they then may be, to get somehow through the administrative processes in or playing with its play, but then also there's an actual sort of intention in somehow at least causing one headache to a city planner who sticks with the sort of the flat language that is used to justify the decisions that can be already decided before any like what is that, asukasosallistaminen, residential participatory thing that is very popular today, but oftentimes means nothing, or sort of there for disguise. Now I'm getting really chatty, but I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, but the words, of course, they would be somewhat random, but somewhat also with depending on what would be the situation. Yeah.
I would like to continue with this. Taru brought up this question of linearity and construction as the kind of paradigms of certain modern thinking and maybe modern city planning. That also implies this kind of dichotomy between culture and nature, and that opens up this kind of idea of possibility of romanticizing the ruins and this kind of thing. And the method that Minna asked could be seen as a way of introducing another logic that could be termed repairing, both in literal sense, like constructing new connections, like pairing anew, repairing, and also the question of bringing along to the paradigm of construction another type of thinking, like reparation and like cyclic thinking. So did you use this kind of idea of repairing in your project in some way?
That's a good word, and that's a good observation or innovation, I might say, in a sense, but with other words. No, repair is, of course, hilarious in that sense that it has all these connotations related to constructing and hammer and all that. Maybe I come oftentimes back to Kuleshov's effect. And in that there's the tendency or the sort of the approach is about pairing different things or texts or images. Well, it was originally used with images, but it can be sort of made reversions or reinterpretations based on that. So like unmatching things together. So that is sort of maybe a little bit that I had also in this use of images and talking on top of that and so, and not changing the slide accordingly and to support what I'm talking about, and so to somehow expose things in an unmatching way. Very new idea in arts, don't you think? Yeah.
Some things need to be made again and again. One more question.
It's rather again a comment, and I think another exception of ruin is also a verb, to ruin.
Yeah.
And I think what you did with the text was to ruin it, and this is also a very positive interpretation of the ruin, and I think it's a very genuine function of artistic research. You know, the idea of opening or disclosing new possibilities through destabilizing, or in these days ruining a text. So it's a kind of a positive interpretation of a negative action.
Yeah. Thanks.
One more question,
Yes, about this ruining in the text, because I think you didn't ruin it, it was already ruins, but you just showed it. And I think that often these city bureaucracy texts, because they are meaningless and they are like nonsense, nobody actually believes in them when they write them. So also the outcome is the same. It becomes also as a nonsense and meaningless. So showing these ruins that will be the outcome, like automatic outcome of such a process, I think it's really a splendid idea.
Thanks. Maybe there comes the repair in question. Yeah. Thanks, Heidi.
There's one more question. Yeah.
Ruins are often inhabited by ghosts. Are they included in your project?
Definitely. Thank you. Don't you feel them all? Kiitos, Katja.
Okay, now it's time to thank Maiju. Thank you. And also thanks for those who have followed this part of the KuvA Research Days online. Thank you, and hopefully the streaming was working well. And the streamed part of KuvA Research Days ends here. So goodbye. And we here on site, we will have a short break and just